I think one of the problems we have at many of these sorts of sessions is that we all want to feel good. We all want to go away on the free ride of an inspirational speaker. And the best example of that is usually the TED Talks. Now, how many of you have been to a TED Talk? Or how many of you Google the TED Talks and get inspired and then check out and send an email on Facebook to your friends? That is a problem. I've spoken at TED and I came back thinking, my God, what a waste of time. Mainly because most people go there thinking, I must suggest that there's a way out. I must find. And TED stands, by the way, for Technology, Education, and Design. It's all about being cool. The problem is that much of what we are talking about is not about being cool. So you get this proliferation of ideas around social media, etc., without anyone acknowledging that most social media is antisocial. And then there are some sacred, there's more bullying than friendships. I sat at a forum at the World Economic Forum in Beijing where the CEO of another tech company went on to suggest that, his son's got 500 friends. And I couldn't help but interrupt and said, does he have one? Obviously not. And at these forums too, there's some sacred cows we should not slay. Typically they are the importance of technology, the role of markets, the role of finance. And you bring the Holy Trinity together and everybody be rich and happy. I'm here to kind of say, I don't think so. The problem is that most of us want a quick fix and we want to go away feeling good. I totally agree with the President that there's too much blaming on the West for our problems. I lived in Africa for 4 years and I said, hey, black brothers, the white man left, 150 years ago, your turn. I tell my Rastafarian friends, smoking marijuana from day to night is not going to solve your problems. Get with the program, meaning get to use the tools of Babylon to come and do something. But we all do want quick fixes, and those are not so easy. But the narrative is a Western narrative. And this is where I might create a bit of discomfort. Look at this room. Where are the Asians? A few. And I'll leave you to explore why that happens in this part of the world. It's the equivalent of a conference in New York about democracy, the economy, and the future of American capitalism, where Algerians, Nigerians, Arabs, Indonesians, and Chinese dominate. So there's two conclusions you can draw from this, which is most of us Asians are asleep at the wheel, which I sort of subscribe to. The elite are asleep at the wheel. Secondly, I think there's a historical hangover of Westerners thinking they can help us. And somewhere in between is where I'd ask you to look in the mirror and say, what do we do about this stuff? So the narrative was Western. The solutions clearly need to be found here. Many of you might have heard a book called Dead Aid, written by an African woman who said, and I agree with the President, the sooner Bono and Bodo, which is, those of you know Indonesian will know that Bodo means stupid. Bono, Bodo, and Geldof get off the scene, we'll have an honest discussion. And there is a problem, therefore, of the discussion. I mean, where's the Rockefeller Foundation? I mean, if I'm going to slay a few cows, I might as well do it now. The notion that the Rockefeller Foundation is in this part of the world telling Cambodians how to get to do with climate change, the best bang for their dollar would be educating Americans about climate change. That would be money well spent. When I speak in the US and I say to Americans, have you heard of the one-child policy in China? You might want the one-car policy. I'm immediately seen as sort of some kind of Taliban trying to interfere with US domestic policy. And I'm ushered to the airport. But that is where the future will be. So my discussion really is about, one is that we stop blaming the West. And I agree totally with the President that the discourse of finger pointing, etc., is a meaningless exercise. And I wrote a piece before Copenhagen saying, failure would be great because it'll wake up the world to this notion that we can somehow have carbon credits and emissions tradings that will solve fundamental problems. I come from an engineering background, and I know you cannot shift pollution. You cannot shift it. You have to reduce pollution. And you first start to reduce pollution, then you might use some economic instruments to try and do certain things, but within certain geographies. And if you think the financial industry ran a big Ponzi scheme for the last 30 years, which took mooks our money, wait till they get their hands on emissions trading. You ain't seen nothing yet. The people at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, they're all salivating, waiting for us to hand over our climate, our future to them. So if you want to see gangsters of the future, look at the climate traders. We will have to do something very differently. So what will Asia have to do? I think the most important thing is we need our elite. And it's very interesting. I speak at quite a few conferences, and especially when the Asian elite are there, no one says anything of any meaning. They all say platitudes. Why? And I won't name some of them because some of them are known. And partly because of our colonial history, and I don't want to blame the colonialists, we have a hangover. Most of us seek respectability and legitimacy through association with Western institutions. If you're a business leader in Asia, you seek legitimacy by being on the board of a Harvard Business School. You will not say that the Harvard Business School supply chain model, which seeks to externalize true costs through the great supply chain management system, is wrong, because you don't get invited to Davos. So there is a silence, a conspiracy. Then we come together, we the do-gooders want to save the world. But in a real sense, we're kind of meaningless. And I don't mean it in a disparaging way. But we seek refuge in the notion that we can change everything. Therefore, the TED be the change, which has become a mantra of let's all get together and be happy. And if we have a love fest and all become vegetarians and granola eating, somehow the world will change. Well, the world is very different. Why will Asia therefore be, as the president said, perhaps at the center of the 21st century? Last week, I was in Singapore speaking at a forum organized with something called the G50, which is the Latin American heads of state. And the first day were lots of Asian business people, typically many Singaporean government officials, all saying to these, this is starry-eyed Latin Americans, how are you guys doing it? And all about how great we are going to be and how we are going to change the world. And I think the president has already alluded to the fact that whilst a lot of foreign direct investments and all of that stuff's happening, there's a huge amount of difficulties here. Clearly, what I don't think the world should be is one in which we in Asia gloat and say, hey, those Europeans, they are in decay. I think this is a very, very dangerous discussion. Whilst I loathe American military power, I do not think we should all wish for the demise of the USA. I just wish they had smarter presidents. That means smarter people who vote a smarter president. But that might be a long call. But we don't want to see the demise of the USA. We want to see a strong, responsible America. We want to see a strong, responsible China. But why will Asia shape the 21st century? Not because we're smarter, not because we have superior values, not because we're going to be the best designers in the world or anything like that, or because we're ethnically superior, but because, for the simple reason, there are going to be 5 billion of us in about 2050. And some will argue in the sustainability debate, and rationally, that numbers are not so much the issue, it's how those numbers behave and act. Yeah? Today, 20% of the world consume 80% of the world's resources. It's still sort of there. It's just the fact that we are behaving and aspiring to behave in the way that 20% are behaving and have behaved. And therefore, I'm talking about consumption. Okay, and earlier we had very good speakers talk about consumption. But I like to bring it into the political arena. 5 billion Asians, Thomas Friedman, how many of you read his latest fairy tale? Okay, sorry. Oh, I didn't mean that. I mean his novel. About flat, crowded, and something. Okay. He says 2050, there'll be 9 billion people, 5 billion of them will be Asians, and hey, they all want to live like Americans. And God forbid. Because if 5 billion Asians consume like Americans, the game's over. You don't need to be a rocket scientist. We don't need Climate Gate to tell us the game's over.